The first night I realized something was off started like any other. Fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something older, thicker, lingering in the corners. I was walking down the hallway at 2:17 a.m., clipboard in hand, marking off rooms as I did every hour, and that's when I saw it. The call button light above room 12 had been blinking steadily for I don't know how long. A steady, quiet pulse. I paused in the hall, expecting the glow to stop, thinking maybe it was a malfunction. But it didn't. It just kept blinking. Room 12 was supposed to be empty that night. Mrs. Callahan had been transferred to hospice yesterday afternoon. I'd watched her leave, bundled into a stretcher, a nurse at her side. The room was supposed to be silent, empty, sterile. Yet there it was, the light, quietly insistent, like someone inside was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, trying to shake off the unease. Nothing about the room looked different. The bed neatly made, the small wooden chair by the window unmoved, a single blanket folded on the edge. No sign of life, no sound except the faint hum of the heating vent above. I reached for the call button panel on the wall, the one that allowed me to reset lights when they were triggered. My fingers hovered over it, and in that moment, I felt something shift in the air. A heaviness, a subtle tension that made my heart beat louder than normal. I pressed the button. The light went out. Relief washed over me in the form of a shallow exhale. But then, just as quickly, it blinked back on. I froze. The rational part of my brain tried to dismiss it. Faulty wiring. A glitch in the system. Maybe a nurse hadn't updated the room status. But the problem was that my instincts told me otherwise. Something about the pulse of that light felt deliberate in a way that no electrical malfunction could reproduce. I stood there for what felt like minutes, just watching, listening. I could almost swear I heard the faintest shuffle, not enough to call a sound, more like the room exhaling, and then the clipboard in my hand vibrated slightly. A subtle thud against the metal railing of the hallway, as if confirming presence. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the room, trying to convince myself that maybe I was imagining it. I told myself stories. Maybe it was the way the heating vent rattled when the temperature dropped. Maybe my own nerves were amplifying ordinary sounds. Maybe Mrs. Callahan's room wasn't empty at all. Maybe the hospice nurse had returned for something, and I hadn't been notified. Any of those explanations would have been reasonable. Except that, when I looked back 5 minutes later, after walking the length of the hall and checking other rooms, the light in room 12 was still blinking, steady, insistent, waiting. I tried to summon the courage to check the video feed at the nurse's station, but the cameras didn't cover that room. At least, not where I thought they did. And even if they did, the monitors upstairs had that slight delay, a lag that meant you were never really seeing the present. It was just history flickering on a screen. And this was happening now. Real time, right here. Right in front of me. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of the night pressing in from all sides. The fluorescent lights above didn't hum so much as hum at me, as if aware I had paused. The shadows along the hallway lengthened in a way that was normal but felt orchestrated. I debated calling for a nurse, telling them the system was acting up, but something inside me hesitated. Not fear, exactly. More respect. Or maybe it was caution. Whatever it was, it convinced me to leave the room alone for the moment. That was the first night. I realized this place wasn't just a building with residents. It was something else. A system, a rhythm, and it noticed everything. Every step I took, every door I passed, every check mark I placed on the logbook. The pulsing call button was the first proof. The facility didn't need to force attention or make noise. It merely observed. It corrected, and it waited. By dawn, the light had stopped blinking. The day nurse came in, cheerful as ever, humming something that stuck in my head all day. I asked casually about room 12. "It's empty," she said, like we said. No explanation for the blinking, no curiosity, just the assertion. I didn't press further. Something told me that would be pointless. I went home that morning, tired, uneasy, and yet strangely compelled to return, and I did return. Every night after, for weeks, for months. Because once you see that a system notices without needing to act aggressively, you can't unsee it. You can't ignore it. You only adapt, step by step, until the line between human agency and the machine of the house or the facility, in this case, becomes impossible to distinguish. Asterisk, the following nights. I started paying more attention to the logbooks. At first it was casual curiosity, a shift in boredom-driven observation. Each hour, my initials beside the room numbers documented that I had walked the halls, checked doors, and made sure the residents were breathing. Nothing unusual, right? But then I noticed subtle inconsistencies, the kind that only someone awake in the middle of the night would catch. Pages from previous weeks, even months, were perfectly neat. Names written in precise handwriting, shift after shift, month after month. There were no erasures, no corrections, no indications of change. Yet I knew people moved in and out. I had seen stretchers leave rooms, ambulances parked out front, grieving family members carrying belongings. Every time the bed was emptied, the room was vacated, and yet when I returned, the names remained, unchanged, complete, persistent. It started with small doubts. I asked the day nurse casually about a few rooms, trying to get a sense of what was happening. "Room Kingsley. Isn't Mr. Lindell out for the doctor today?" I asked. She glanced at the board, then back at me, expression neutral. "Yes, he's gone, but he'll be back," she said, as if that explained everything. I nodded, but inside I felt a twinge of unease. How could he be gone and back in the same log, the same name on the same line, hours apart? The explanation made no sense. And when I checked again that night, Mr. Lindell's name was right where it had been. Over the next week, I began noticing other patterns. Some residents rarely moved from their beds, but others, those who were more mobile, left multiple times in one night. For appointments, for visits, for routine transfers. And yet every time I tallied the names, the numbers never changed. 28 residents, 28 names, full occupancy. Always, there were nights when several rooms were technically empty, yet the board didn't reflect it. My attempts to reconcile what I saw with what I logged only deepened the unease. It was as if the building itself had a memory that defied reality. I started documenting anomalies for myself. I took notes in a separate notebook, recording the times residents left and returned. Sometimes they didn't return. Sometimes I knew for certain they were being transferred elsewhere permanently. But the whiteboard, the logbooks, the official records, all of them insisted otherwise. Every night I watched as new shift attendants walked in, glanced at the board, nodded, and proceeded with their routines, apparently unaware of the contradictions. Some didn't even question it. I began to feel a creeping alienation from the place. I was observing a system that didn't just manage life, but seemed to manage the perception of life. The more I watched, the more I realized how carefully controlled everything was. Beds were always made to the same standard. Call buttons responded consistently. Rooms smelled identical. And lights flicked on and off according to a schedule I couldn't fully track. Even the sound, the low hum of vents, the occasional shuffle in the hall, followed a rhythm like the building itself was breathing. And in the midst of it all, the whiteboard was the anchor. 28 names, 28 rooms, a perfect, unchanging ledger of occupancy that ignored reality entirely. One night, curiosity overwhelmed my caution. I asked the head nurse about the turnover rates, trying to frame it casually. She looked at me, expression blank. "Not often," she said. "Most residents stay once they're here." I pressed gently. "Even those transferred for hospital care or hospice?" She shrugged. "Sometimes temporary, sometimes permanent. But the board, we leave it the same. Makes it easier for staffing." That casual explanation should have eased me. Instead, it sent a chill down my spine. Leave it the same. Make it easier. She spoke as if the names weren't people, as if the residents weren't alive, but lines in a ledger that could be ignored and replaced at will. I began noticing the subtle ways the system asserted itself. If a resident left the room without notifying staff, someone or something corrected it. Chairs would be placed back perfectly. Bedsheets straightened. Pillows fluffed. And if I recorded a discrepancy in the logbook, the following night it was gone, erased, overwritten by the familiar initials of someone else. The handwriting changed, yes, but the order, the format, the consistency remained. As if the building, or the administration, or whatever invisible mechanism was behind it, couldn't tolerate imperfection. By the end of that second week, my nights were no longer calm. Every step, every check, every mark I made in the logbook felt like being watched, evaluated. Not by a person necessarily, not in a traditional sense, but by a system that had its own rules, its own sense of correctness, and its own relentless memory. I wasn't just doing a job anymore. I was participating in a process I didn't fully understand, and the building made it clear that my understanding wasn't required. My compliance was, and that's when I noticed it. The whiteboard had names for residents who weren't physically present anymore. Residents who I knew had been moved permanently. Residents who had died. Their names remained, occupying space, demanding attention, maintaining order. That was the moment I understood the true horror of the place. This wasn't a care facility. It was a ledger. It tracked occupancy, not life. And life, human life, was secondary. Asterisk, doing a job anymore. I was participating in a process I didn't fully understand, and the building made it clear that my understanding wasn't required. My compliance was, and that's when I noticed it. The whiteboard had names for residents who weren't physically present anymore. Residents who I knew had been moved permanently. Residents who had died. Their names remained, occupying space, demanding attention, maintaining order. That was the moment I understood the true horror of the place. This wasn't a care facility. It was a ledger. It tracked occupancy, not life. And life, human life, was secondary. If you like, I can move directly to paragraph 3. where the first real psychological tension escalates, and the impossible continuity becomes undeniable, fully setting the stage for the slow burn terror. Do you want me to continue? Para 3 perfect. Now we escalate tension. Paragraph 3 shows the psychological horror of realization that the system doesn't track life, only occupancy, and we start seeing patterns that shouldn't exist. 7,000 characters. New script, paragraph 3 of 10, approximately 7,000 characters. It didn't hit me all at once. That kind of realization never does. It crept in slowly, night after night, like a shadow stretching across the hallway floor. I started to notice things that didn't add up. A resident would be transferred to the hospital for a procedure I knew would take a week, but their name remained on the board as if nothing had happened. I asked the overnight nurse about it once. She said, "We just leave the board. Makes it easier for everyone to know who's here." I nodded, trying to appear calm, but inside a cold not formed. Easier for whom? The residents were gone. Their lives had moved on. But the whiteboard, the logbooks, the facility itself didn't acknowledge absence. It insisted on continuity, insisted on constancy. And in that insistence, I began to feel that something larger, older, and impersonal was running the show. Not people, not policy, something else. I began tracking every anomaly in a notebook I carried discreetly. I noted the times residents were taken out, the times they returned, and when they never returned at all. I tallied discrepancies, and the pattern was undeniable. Residents who should have been absent either through transfer, hospital visits, or death were still accounted for in every system. The board, the logbooks, even in the way other staff treated the rooms as though they were occupied. Beds made, lights left on, medications lined up in neat rows, everything preserved as though the person had never left. It wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. And the consistency was meticulous, unnervingly precise. The realization hit me hardest with Mrs. Callahan. I had watched her leave on a stretcher, accompanied by a hospice nurse, pale, fragile, fading in ways that couldn't be denied. Yet when I returned that night, her name was right there on the board, next to room 12, the same place she'd always been. I asked another attendant about it. "Oh, she's listed as still here. Administration keeps the name up for staffing," they said casually. And it was casual. No apology, no hesitation, no recognition that this made no sense. That was when the first real chill crawled down my spine. It wasn't the fluorescent lights, or the shadows, or the emptiness of the halls. It was the indifference of the system to life itself. Night after night, I watched the same phenomenon repeat. Residents leaving permanently for reasons that should have removed their presence entirely. Yet all systems insisted they remained. Beds stayed meticulously made, personal items arranged exactly as before, call buttons active, lights timed perfectly, rooms clean and orderly, untouched by the absence of human beings. And the whiteboard, the immutable ledger of names, remained constant. No erasures, no edits, no deviations. I began to dread the simple act of checking it because it felt less like record keeping and more like witnessing. A deliberate refusal to acknowledge reality. The psychological weight grew heavier with each passing week. I found myself second-guessing my own senses. Had I really seen Mr. Lindell leave for the hospital? Had Mrs. Callahan really been taken by hospice? Or was I imagining it? But no. I had witnesses, notes, schedules, proof. And yet the facilities, systems were indifferent to proof. Human life and absence were irrelevant. The ledger, the board, the logs, the administrative routines was the only truth. And that truth was horrifying. I began noticing subtle ways the building itself enforced this continuity. A chair slightly repositioned in a room I had straightened. Lights turning on automatically in spaces I hadn't entered. Call buttons for absent residents occasionally blinking. It was as if the facility had a memory separate from human memory, a meticulous, self-correcting memory that preserved appearances perfectly, regardless of actual events. Any disruption I tried to introduce was quietly corrected. Not aggressively, not loudly, but in ways precise enough to make me doubt my own authority in the space. The more I observed, the more the realization sank in. I was no longer an observer. I had become part of the system. Every round I took, every log I initialed, every check I performed, I was feeding the machine that ignored life, ignored absence, ignored reality itself. Compliance was not optional. It was expected. I hadn't been hired merely to ensure residents were safe. I had been integrated into the mechanism that maintained the illusion of permanence. The whiteboard, the logbooks, the lights, the beds, the smell, the rhythm of the night, all of it was orchestrated with or without my participation, but my participation made it seamless. By the end of that third week, I no longer felt like I was working in a nursing home. I was working inside a system whose priorities were alien, impersonal, relentless. The residents' lives were fleeting, the ledger eternal. And the more I realized this, the less I recognized the boundaries between what I could control and what the building demanded. My role had shifted from caretaker to witness, from observer to participant in a silent, bureaucratic horror. Every step I took, every mark I made, only reinforced the illusion of occupancy. And in that silence, I began to understand the full scope of the horror. The facility didn't care if someone left, if someone died, or if someone moved on. What it cared about was continuity, order, maintenance of a perception that life remained constant, even when it didn't, and I was part of enforcing it, not maliciously, not intentionally, but inevitably. Every night, I participated in a process that erased absence, ignored mortality, and preserved the illusion that nothing had changed. It happened on a Tuesday night. I had just finished my hourly rounds, clipboard in hand, ticking off names with mechanical precision, when the call bell on room 18 began to flash urgently. Mr. Hastings, an older man who had always been quiet and meticulous about his routine, was in his bed. Something felt off before I even entered. A stillness that didn't belong, a silence heavier than the usual night. When I opened the door, I saw him slumped over the side of his bed, his breathing shallow, irregular, barely there. Panic rose immediately, the kind that hits when you know instinctively that something is irreversible. I checked his pulse. Nothing. He was gone, cold. The life that had filled the room just minutes before had vanished entirely. I called a nurse on duty in a trembling voice. Within minutes, she arrived, calm, practiced. She confirmed what I already knew. Mr. Hastings had died. I expected the chaos I had seen in films, in hospitals, in real life, the flurry of activity, the sadness, the urgent paperwork, the alarms. But none of that happened here. There were no screams, no hurried steps. The nurse simply nodded, gave instructions I barely registered, and left me to continue my rounds. The logbook, however, was a different matter. When I glanced at it the next hour, his name remained unchanged. Room 18 occupied. Mr. Hastings, alive. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was mistaken, that in some mundane bureaucratic twist the board had yet to be updated. But the following hours proved otherwise. I watched as the evening staff came and went. They performed their duties as though Mr. Hastings had simply chosen to remain in bed, resting, unaware that life had left him behind. Medication rounds continued in his room. Lights flicked on and off. Call buttons remained active, waiting for a resident who could no longer press them. His personal effects, neatly folded clothing, books stacked just so, remained arranged as if he might return at any moment. And the whiteboard, unchanged. I stared at it for several minutes, fingers frozen on the clipboard. Mr. Hastings' name was exactly where it had been at 11 p.m. And now it was 1 a.m., and still nothing had been corrected. At first, I told myself it was just oversight. Perhaps administration had been busy, and updating the records would take time. But that rationalization crumbled the next night, and the next, and the one after that. Week after week, Mr. Hastings' name remained. Occupancy listed at 100%. Even staff members who had worked for years here didn't question it. They didn't erase the name, didn't replace it, didn't mark it in any way to indicate absence. The ledger ignored death as easily as it ignored absence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see the pattern. This facility did not track residents. It tracked occupancy. Life was secondary. Death was irrelevant. I began to document this in more detail, using my notebook to record times of death, times of transfers, and the corresponding status on the board. The inconsistencies were impossible. Residents who had been removed for hospitalizations reappeared on the logs, as if the building had a memory that refused to accept their absence. Some rooms were occupied even when empty, with beds made, lights on, and medications arranged precisely as though someone was present. The consistency of it was unnerving. It was as if the building, the staff, the entire administrative system conspired to erase absence. And in doing so, it erased individuality, humanity, and the natural flow of life. By the end of that week, the psychological weight was almost unbearable. Each room, each bed, each name on the board reminded me of the same truth. This place functioned according to rules that did not acknowledge mortality. Residents could die, be transferred, or leave entirely, and the ledger would remain intact. I tried to imagine it in human terms, and I couldn't. The logic defied morality, defied biology. The system didn't punish or reward. It corrected, it maintained, it persisted. Mr. Hastings was gone, yet the building treated him as present, alive, part of the machine. And in that treatment, I realized my own role. I was complicit. Every round I took, every initial I placed, every check I made in the logbook was part of the mechanism that preserved the illusion. I became hyper-aware of the subtle cues around me. Chairs shifted slightly after I adjusted them. Pillows were fluffed after I left. Medications that I had logged as administered reappeared neatly arranged. Even the air seemed to adjust itself. Temperature, humidity, lighting, all returning to a standard, precise pattern. The facility had its own rules, its own rhythms, its own memory, and I was merely a participant in enforcing them. My thoughts drifted to Mr. Hastings, to the indifference with which his passing was treated, and a cold understanding settled in. Death, absence, human reality, none of it mattered here. Only continuity mattered. Only the ledger. Only the system. And that is when the first true dread set in. I wasn't afraid of death, nor of ghosts, nor even of the isolation of the night shift. I was afraid of the mechanical perfection of indifference, of the meticulous, unfeeling orchestration that ignored life entirely. I had joined what I thought was a simple overnight job. Instead, I had become a witness to a machine that preserved the semblance of life while erasing its reality. And the deeper I delved into its routines, the more I realized this was only the beginning. The facility would continue, relentless, precise, unmoved by human frailty. And I was trapped inside its rhythm, whether I accepted it or not. Asterisk. It started with small notes, folded slips of paper, neatly placed on the nurse's station or tucked under a clipboard. The first one I found had no signature, no indication of who left it. Just a single line in perfect, almost mechanical handwriting. Check the log. Ensure continuity. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a shiver creep up my spine. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't emotional. It was an instruction, and it was correct. I looked at the logbook. Every room ticked off, every resident accounted for, every absence noted as though it never existed. My hands shook as I initialed the pages again, as if obeying the note might somehow shield me from understanding what I was seeing. Over the next few nights, more notes appeared, each one slightly more specific. Room 7, maintain schedule. Do not disturb the pattern. Ensure residents remain present in the ledger. There were never names, never indications of urgency. Yet the tone was absolute. The handwriting was always neat, uniform, almost eerily perfect, as if written by a machine rather than a human hand. I asked the day nurse about it once, casually, hoping for a rational explanation, misplaced paperwork, some quirky protocol. She only smiled faintly and said, "Those notes. Administration leaves them for overnight staff. They're reminders. Helps keep things consistent." That answer should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. It was too precise, too deliberate, too... Knowing, I started seeing patterns beyond the notes. Rooms would be prepared in advance for residents who were no longer present. Beds made perfectly, lights adjusted to preference. Call buttons blinking occasionally as if waiting for someone who had long since passed or been transferred. Objects shifted subtly. Chairs moved. Pillows fluffed. Even the ambient temperature adjusted itself. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, the result of automated systems or human diligence. But the more I observed, the more impossible it became to attribute everything to routine. Something the building, the ledger, the administration, I don't know, was orchestrating events beyond normal care. One night, I found a note in room 18, Mr. Hastings' room. The man who had died days before. Ensure presence is maintained. Do not alter arrangement. I froze. The room was quiet, untouched. His bed perfectly made. Pills lined in neat rows. It was absurd. He was gone. Physically, permanently, undeniably gone. And yet the note instructed me to treat him as though he was still here. I didn't know whether to obey or ignore it. The logic of the note was undeniable, terrifying in its calm authority. If I followed it, I was complicit. If I ignored it, I risked disrupting whatever invisible system governed this place. And I couldn't risk that. Not after seeing what happened with Mr. Hastings and the consistency of the ledger. The psychological toll mounted quickly. I began anticipating the notes, scanning each room, reading logs with hyper-awareness, second-guessing every decision, every action. The facility wasn't passive. It didn't simply erase absence. It reinforced presence. It demanded compliance. It monitored my compliance through mechanisms I couldn't see, control, or fully understand. Sleep became shallow. I would wake in the middle of the night, convinced I had forgotten to initial a log or obey a note. I found myself returning to rooms I had already checked, readjusting beds, confirming lights, straightening personal effects. I was no longer working for the residents. I was working for the system. The notes eventually escalated in subtle ways. Some instructed actions I hadn't previously considered, minor rearrangements, checking medications twice, verifying temperatures, counting pillows. Each time, the instructions were neutral, polite even, but the implication was clear. Everything I did mattered. The system noticed. Every deviation, however minor, would be corrected, and I began to notice that deviations I attempted were quietly undone. Beds I had straightened differently would return to the previous arrangement. Lights I adjusted would revert. Even the notes themselves sometimes disappeared, replaced by new, slightly altered versions that reflected the correct action. It wasn't punishment. It was enforcement. Silent, calm, meticulous enforcement. By the end of the 5th week, I was living inside the notes. Each round, each initial, each step was influenced by their presence. I no longer asked questions. I followed instructions automatically, fearful of disrupting the order. And yet, every night, I felt the same oppressive realization settling deeper. The facility wasn't caring for residents, not really. It wasn't tracking life. It wasn't even observing people. It was observing compliance, presence, patterns, continuity. The resident's existence was secondary. What mattered was maintaining the ledger, the appearance of order, the uninterrupted rhythm of occupancy, and I had become a part of it. Asterisk, the first time I disobeyed the system, I didn't do it out of rebellion. I did it out of exhaustion. It was close to 4 in the morning, the hour when the building felt most artificial, too quiet, too controlled, like a place pretending to sleep. I skipped one instruction, just one. The note had asked me to reset the bedding in room 18 again, to ensure continuity. I didn't. I initialed the log, finished my rounds, and sat at the nurse's station, telling myself it didn't matter. That one small deviation couldn't possibly register. I was wrong. When I returned to room 18 an hour later, the bed had been remade, not differently, not sloppily, perfectly. Hospital corners, sharp enough to cut paper. Pillows stacked in the precise order I had seen dozens of times before. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, staring, my mouth dry. No staff had passed me in the hall. No one else was on that wing. The cameras didn't cover the room. There was no rational explanation. The system hadn't punished me. It had corrected me. After that, the tests became more frequent. I would delay logging a check, and the logbook would already be filled in when I returned. I would adjust a chair slightly, experimentally, and find it back in its original position within the hour. I once left a call button unplugged in an empty room, just to see what would happen. 20 minutes later, it was plugged back in and blinking softly, waiting. Not malfunctioning, waiting. The notes changed tone to not threatening, not angry, just more precise. Deviation noted, ensure alignment. Presence must be maintained. They weren't instructions anymore. They were assessments. That's when I realized something important, something deeply unsettling. The system didn't need me to believe in it. It only needed me to participate. My thoughts, my doubts, my fear, irrelevant. My actions were all that mattered. And as long as I performed them, the system remained stable. I started noticing the way other staff moved through the building, not mechanically comfortably, like people who had long ago surrendered the need to question. They didn't see residents. They saw tasks. They didn't see rooms. They saw assignments. When I mentioned Mr. Hastings once, casually, a nurse paused and said, "Room 18." I nodded. She checked the board and replied, "Occupied." That was the end of the conversation. Not denial, replacement. One night, I found a note waiting for me at the nurse's station before I even began my shift. That had never happened before. It read, "Your role is essential. Do not disrupt continuity." Essential. The word sat heavy in my chest. I hadn't been hired to care for people. I had been integrated into a system that required human hands to maintain its illusion. The facility couldn't function alone. It needed attendants, nurses, administrators, not for compassion, but for legitimacy. We were the interface, the human layer that made the machine acceptable. The most disturbing realization came quietly. I noticed that my own name had appeared in a new binder behind the desk. An emergency contact list. My schedule. My assigned areas. My initials, repeated over weeks, forming a pattern as rigid as the residents' names. I wasn't just maintaining the system. I was being logged by it, accounted for, tracked, and then I saw it on the whiteboard. In the corner where temporary staff names were sometimes written in dry erase marker, there was my name. Not prominently, not emphasized, just there, spelled correctly, aligned with a shift block. No explanation. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, feeling the slow, suffocating pressure of understanding settle in. The facility didn't distinguish between caregivers and residents. Both were components. Both were entries. Both served continuity. That was the moment fear finally arrived. Not panic, not shock, but something colder. I wasn't afraid of being trapped physically. I was afraid that leaving might not be recognized. That absence, once ignored, could be overridden. That I might remain part of the ledger even if I walked out the front door and never came back. And once that thought takes root, you start to notice something else. The system doesn't stop people from leaving. It simply continues without acknowledging that they ever did. Asterisk, I decided to quit on a Thursday morning, right after my shift ended. No speech, no confrontation. I didn't storm into an office or demand answers. I simply told myself I wouldn't come back. That was it. People quit jobs every day. There was nothing dramatic about the decision. I clocked out, drove home as the sun came up, and went to bed with a strange sense of relief, like I had finally stepped outside a sealed room and could breathe again. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. When I woke up that afternoon, my phone had 3 missed calls, all from the facility. No voicemail, no urgency indicated, just the calls. I ignored them. I told myself it was scheduling, or confusion, or routine. I showered, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and felt something close to normalcy return. The building already felt distant, unreal. like a bad dream that lost its power in daylight. That illusion lasted until I checked my email. There was a message time-stamped 7:12 a.m. sent less than 10 minutes after I clocked out. No subject line, no sender name, just the facility's internal system address. The body of the email was short. Absence noted. Schedule remains unchanged. That was it. I stared at the screen, waiting for the fear to spike. It didn't. What I felt instead was irritation, administrative tone, clerical phrasing, the same language used in the notes, the logs, the whiteboard. I replied, something I hadn't planned to do. I typed that I was resigning, effective immediately, that I would not be returning, that I expected confirmation. I hit send. There was no response. The next morning, another email arrived. Coverage confirmed. Continuity maintained. Still no acknowledgement of my resignation. Still no recognition of intent. Just correction, maintenance. I drove past the facility that afternoon, telling myself it was coincidence. The parking lot looked normal. Staff coming and going, lights on. Nothing visibly wrong. And yet, when I glanced through the front windows, I saw the whiteboard. Even from that distance, I knew where to look. The corner, the temporary staff area, my name was still there. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront anyone. I just sat in my car, watching people walk in and out of a place that had already decided I still belonged to it. I told myself it was meaningless, that boards didn't define reality, that records could be wrong, that systems lag behind human decisions all the time. But that night, something changed. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the same time as the first blinking call light weeks. Earlier, my phone buzzed. A notification from the facility's internal scheduling app. I hadn't opened it since deciding to quit. The message was simple. Shift reminder, overnight attendant assigned. Assigned, not scheduled. Not requested, assigned. I deleted the app immediately. Blocked the number. Turned off my phone. I needed separation. Proof that I had left. That I still had agency. That systems didn't get to decide my presence after I withdrew consent. The following morning, a letter arrived. Plain white envelope. No postage stamp. No return address. Just my name, printed neatly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Same handwriting as the notes. Same precision. Attendance is not optional once integration is complete. I sat there for a long time, letter in my hands, feeling something cold settle behind my ribs. Not fear, recognition. The system hadn't reacted emotionally to my attempt to leave. It hadn't threatened me. It hadn't escalated. It had simply reasserted its rules. You don't resign from a system like this. You are either present or you are corrected. That night, I didn't go back. I stayed home. I paced. I waited for something to happen. A call, a knock, some consequence. Nothing did. The world remained painfully normal. And that was the most disturbing part. Because when I checked my email the next morning, there was another message. Absence reconciled. I didn't understand it at first. Not until I drove past the facility. Again later that day, the whiteboard had been updated. My name was no longer in the temporary staff section. It had been moved, listed alongside the residents, asterisk, I didn't go inside the building after that. I couldn't. Seeing my name listed alongside the residents was enough to make my stomach turn. It wasn't written differently. It wasn't highlighted or marked. It was just there, aligned neatly with a room number I didn't recognize. No explanation, no annotation. The system hadn't punished me for leaving. It had reassigned me. That was worse. Punishment implies emotion. This was administrative. For days afterward, I tried to live normally. I stayed home. I avoided that part of town. I told myself that whiteboards and emails didn't define who I was. That paperwork couldn't rewrite reality. And for a while, it almost worked. Until the mail started arriving. The first envelope contained a medication schedule. My name at the top. Dosage times listed below. No drugs specified, just time slots. Morning, afternoon, evening. Bedtime. I laughed when I first saw it. A short, sharp laugh that felt forced even to me. Someone had made a mistake. A clerical error. That's what I told myself. But the next envelope arrived the following day. Then another. Room assignment. Dietary notes. Prefers routine. Responds well to structure. These weren't random. They were observations. Someone or something was documenting me. Asterisk, I called the facility's main number, not the overnight line. Administration, HR, anyone. The phone rang longer than it should have before someone answered. When I gave my name, there was a pause. Not confusion, recognition. The woman on the other end didn't ask why I was calling. She asked, "Are you calling from off-site?" I said yes. Another pause. "That's fine," she replied. "Your status remains unchanged." Status. I hung up without saying anything else. That night, I dreamed I was back in the hallway. Same fluorescent lights, same hum. Only this time, the doors were labeled differently. Not with names I recognized, but with compliant, non-disruptive, pending adjustment. When I reached the end of the hall, there was a door with my name on it. I woke up before I could open it, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from a number I didn't recognize. No text, just a calendar invite. Overnight shift. Room number assigned. Attendance marked as expected. I didn't accept it. I didn't decline it. I deleted it. An hour later, it reappeared. Same details. Same tone. Unavoidable. Asterisk, I started noticing small changes in my own routine. I was waking up at the same time every night to 17 a.m. exactly. No alarm. No reason, just awake. Alert, as if something expected me to be. I found myself straightening my living room before bed, aligning objects unconsciously, adjusting lights, checking locks multiple times in the same sequence. The habits felt familiar, comforting, and that terrified me. The final confirmation came when I checked my credit report. A new address had been added. The facility's address, listed under current residence. I hadn't updated anything. I hadn't signed anything. But there it was, official, clean, verified. I realized then that the system wasn't limited to walls or whiteboards. It extended outward into databases, records, structures the society trusts implicitly. If the system said I resided there, then functionally, I did. I understood something then that made my hands shake. Leaving physically was irrelevant. The system didn't need my body. It needed my classification, my role, and it had already assigned one. I wasn't staff anymore. I was occupancy. Asterisk, once I accepted that the system had classified me, everything else began to make sense in a way I didn't want. The calls stopped. The emails slowed. The notes no longer arrived. Not because the system had let go, but because, from its perspective, there was no longer a discrepancy to correct. I had stopped resisting in ways it recognized. I wasn't calling. I wasn't replying. I wasn't showing up. And yet, administratively, I was present. That was enough. The first physical sign came on a Sunday morning when someone knocked on my door. Not aggressively, not urgently. 3 slow, measured knocks. When I opened it, there were 2 people standing there, a man and a woman, both wearing neutral clothing, no logos, no badges. They introduced themselves as care coordinators. Not from the facility directly, they said. From an affiliated services group. Their tone was calm, rehearsed, unbothered by the fact that I was visibly confused. They told me they were there to assess readiness. I asked for readiness for what? The woman smiled politely and said, for transition. Like that was a self-explanatory answer. They stepped inside without waiting for permission. They didn't inspect my home, the way social workers or inspectors do. They didn't open cabinets or check appliances. They observed me. How I moved, how I spoke, how I reacted to their presence. The man made small notes on a tablet. The woman asked gentle questions framed as concern. Was I sleeping regularly? Did I feel disoriented at night? Did I ever feel the need for routine to feel safe? Each question felt less like an inquiry and more like confirmation. At one point, the woman glanced at my living room and said, "You've already adapted well." I asked what she meant. She gestured subtly, the aligned furniture, the identical spacing between objects, the lights set to the same intensity in every room. I hadn't noticed how far it had gone until she pointed it out before they left. The man said something that still echoes in my head. Voluntary transition is always preferable. That night, I didn't sleep. At 2:17 a.m., my phone turned on by itself. Not a call, not a message. Just a screen displaying a single line of text, room prepared. I didn't go the following morning. A moving truck was parked outside my building. No company name. No paperwork taped to the side. Just a driver standing beside it, waiting. When I asked him who sent him, he shrugged. Standard relocation, he said. Already paid for. I told him there had been a mistake. He checked his clipboard. My name was there. My current address. The facility's address listed as destination. He didn't argue. He didn't insist. He just said, if not today, it'll be rescheduled. That word again, rescheduled. I realized then that this wasn't about force. It was about inevitability. The system didn't need to drag me anywhere. It simply continued adjusting circumstances until resistance became impractical. Bills began redirecting. Appointments changed locations. Mail delayed, then rerouted. Even my doctor's office called to confirm my updated residence for future visits. Every structure I relied on, healthcare, records, services, recognized the facility as my point of reference. I tried one last thing. I contacted an old friend out of state and asked if I could stay with him for a while. He agreed. When I arrived, exhausted and desperate, he looked at me strangely. Not suspicious, concerned. He told me he'd received a call. Earlier that day, someone claiming to be from a care coordination service asking if he was prepared to support a transition-dependent individual. They thanked him for his cooperation before he could object. Didn't stay the night. Driving away, it finally became clear the system wasn't pursuing me. It was closing gaps, correcting inconsistencies, ensuring that every component, human or otherwise, was where it belonged according to its logic. I had become a problem of classification, and systems like this don't tolerate unresolved entries. Asterisk. I'm telling this story from a place that isn't listed on any of my documents anymore. Not officially, not cleanly. I learned, eventually, how to exist in the margins, to live without updating records, without signing forms, without being processed by systems that insist on continuity above all else. It isn't freedom, it's absence, and absence is fragile. The facility still exists. I know that because sometimes, late at night, I receive mail that isn't addressed to where I live now. No forwarding label, no explanation for how it found me, just envelopes with no return address and handwriting I recognize immediately. I don't open them anymore. I don't need to. I already know what they say. Status updates, adjustments, reminders that continuity is ongoing, with or without my cooperation. What haunts me isn't the idea that the building is evil. That would be comforting. Evil can be fought. What haunts me is that the system is logical, efficient. It doesn't hurt people. It repurposes them. It doesn't imprison. It categorizes. It doesn't need walls if it controls the records that define where you belong. I think about Mr. Hastings often, about how quietly he disappeared, about how no one panicked, no alarms sounded, no investigations were launched. He wasn't removed. He was resolved. I understand now that the moment someone stops fitting cleanly into the world, when they become inconvenient, unaligned, disruptive to flow, systems like this don't destroy them. They absorb them. If you're listening to this and thinking it couldn't happen to you, I understand. I thought the same thing. I trusted paperwork, databases, procedures. I believed that identity was something you owned. It isn't. It's something that's managed. And once you're integrated deeply enough, opting out becomes a clerical problem, not a personal choice. Sometimes I wake up at 2:17 a.m. Still, my body hasn't forgotten. On those nights, I sit quietly and remind myself where I am. I check my surroundings. I make sure nothing has been realigned without my noticing. I live deliberately disordered now. Objects uneven, lights mismatched, routines broken. It's the only way I know how to resist, because I know this, the system is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits for age, for fatigue, for moments when resistance feels like too much work. It waits for people to choose structure over uncertainty, safety over autonomy, continuity over freedom, and when they do, it doesn't celebrate, it simply updates the board.